What if I told you some of the heaviest, most jaw-dropping rock bands of the 70s were bands you've probably never heard of? Groups that could match Led Zeppelin riff for riff, that pushed boundaries even Sabbath wouldn't touch, and yet their careers ended before they ever got started. These aren't your average one-hit wonders. These are the bands buried by bad contracts, lost to poor timing, or simply too far ahead of their era. Their names might not be on t-shirts or Hall of Fame plaques, but their music became the secret blueprint for the future of hard rock and heavy metal. Today, we're uncovering 10 forgotten rock bands that deserved so much more. Each one had the talent to make history, but fate had other plans. Stick around, because by the end of this list, you'll have a new set of bands to add to your playlist, and you'll see just how much of rock's legacy was written by groups history almost erased. And we kick it off with a one-album wonder that hit harder than most bands with a decade-long career. Number 10, Highway Robbery. How does a band release one of the loudest, rawest albums of the early 70s and then vanish almost instantly? That's the story of Highway Robbery, one of rock's most ferocious one-album wonders. In 1972, they dropped For Love or Money, a record so heavy and aggressive that it felt like it arrived 5 years too early. The guitars were gritty, the vocals were wild, and the energy hit like a freight train. Songs like Lazy Woman and Mystery Rider proved they weren't just imitating Zeppelin or Sabbath. They were pushing toward a sound that foreshadowed AC/DC and Judas Priest. But despite the firepower, the industry didn't know what to do with them. Without a big hit single or label push, For Love or Money barely sold. Highway Robbery had the sound, but not the spotlight. Within a year, they were gone, swallowed by the crowded hard rock scene. And it's a shame, because musically, they had it all. Their riffs were gritty enough for the metal crowd, but their melodies carried a swagger that could have crossed into mainstream rock radio. If they had gotten the right producer, the right tour slot, or even one breakout single, Highway Robbery might have been a household name alongside Aerosmith or Thin Lizzy. Instead, they became another casualty of the almost famous pile. Here's the twist: collectors never forgot. Over time, their album became a cult favorite, with fans paying big money just to track down original vinyl. Modern reissues have introduced new generations to their sound, and critics now argue that Highway Robbery were one of the great lost hard rock bands of the 70s. They were raw, they were relentless, and they were robbed of their chance at rock history. And if you think that's tragic, wait until you hear about a band from Cleveland that had everything lined up for stardom, until mismanagement crushed their rise. Number 9, Granicus. Imagine being a young band in the early 70s, getting signed to a major label, recording in a professional studio, and being told you're going to be the next big thing, only to watch it all collapse before it even begins. That's the painful story of Granicus, a hard rock powerhouse from Cleveland, Ohio. In 1973, Granicus released their self-titled debut album on RCA Records. From the opening notes, it was clear this wasn't just another bar band trying to copy Zeppelin. Granicus mixed heavy riffs with a psychedelic edge, weaving in progressive structures that set them apart from their peers. Their sound carried the heaviness of Sabbath, the raw drive of Zeppelin, and flashes of experimental energy that hinted at something bigger. The band's vocals, delivered by Woody Leffel, were nothing short of blistering. His soaring high notes gave Granicus a unique signature that many fans compared to Robert Plant at his most unhinged. Tracks like You're in America and Bad Talk showcased not just their aggression, but also a sense of ambition that made it clear these guys were aiming high. So what went wrong? The same thing that kills so many promising careers: mismanagement and lack of support. Despite being on RCA, Granicus received almost no promotion. Their debut barely reached listeners outside of Ohio, and without a single push to radio, the album fell into obscurity. A planned second album never materialized, and the band dissolved within just a couple of years. But here's the kicker: Granicus didn't fade quietly. Over the years, their one album became a cult obsession among vinyl collectors and underground rock historians. Bootleg copies passed from hand to hand, and younger fans discovered that this lost band had delivered one of the most underrated proto-metal records of the 70s. Eventually, reissues and a reunion decades later would bring Granicus back into the conversation. But by then, the mainstream moment they deserved had long since passed. Listening to Granicus today feels like uncovering a time capsule. A snapshot of what rock could have been if a few lucky breaks had gone their way. They weren't just good, they were great. They just needed the machine behind them. And if Granicus were a band crushed by bad business, the next group on our list faced something entirely different. A trio from Wales whose sound was so heavy that Metallica themselves would later resurrect it. Number 8. Budgie. If Black Sabbath are credited as the godfathers of heavy metal, then Budgie are the forgotten cousins who deserve just as much recognition. Formed in Cardiff, Wales, in 1967, Budgie were one of the earliest bands to fuse thunderous riffs with surreal lyrics and a sense of humor that made them stand out. They weren't just a copy of Sabbath. They were pushing the genres into weird, wonderful directions. Budgie's sound was defined by the roaring bass of Burke Shelley, who also handled vocals, paired with Tony Borge's blistering guitar work. Songs like Bread Fan and Crash Course in Brain Surgery weren't just heavy. They were blueprint tracks for what heavy metal would later become. In fact, Bread Fan became so influential that Metallica famously covered it in the 1980s, introducing a whole new generation of fans to Budgie's genius. But while their music inspired countless bands, Budgie never broke through to the mainstream. Part of the problem was image. While Sabbath had a dark, ominous aura and Zeppelin carried themselves like rock gods, Budgie leaned into quirky humor and oddball lyrics. One of their albums was even titled, "If I Were Britannia, I'd Waive the Rules." Critics didn't always know what to make of them, and without the right marketing push, Budgie remained more of a cult act than a charting success. Still, they had a loyal following in the UK and parts of Europe, where their albums developed legendary status among serious rock fans. Live, they were ferocious, a three-piece band that sounded as massive as any arena act of the day. Musicians who saw them play often left wondering how such a small group could produce such a towering wall of sound. Over time, Budgie's influence only grew. Metallica's covers, along with shout-outs from bands like Van Halen and Soundgarden, kept their name alive. For younger fans digging back into the roots of metal, Budgie became a secret handshake. The band you mentioned to prove you really knew your history. Budgie might not have sold out stadiums, but they left fingerprints all over heavy music. Without them, the path from Sabbath to thrash metal might have looked very different. And if Budgie were overlooked because they were a little too quirky for the mainstream, the next band on our list suffered a different fate. Praised as pioneers of heavy metal itself, only to implode under the weight of their own chaos. Number 7. Sir Lord Baltimore. Before Black Sabbath even cemented their legacy, a band from Brooklyn was already being called heavy metal in print. That band was Sir Lord Baltimore, and their 1970 debut Kingdom Come helped define what the genre would become. In fact, it was Cream magazine that first used the term heavy metal to describe their sound. That's how ahead of the curve they were. Musically, Sir Lord Baltimore were thunderous. Guitarist Louis D'Ambra unleashed distorted riffs that sounded like a sledgehammer, while drummer-vocalist John Garner pounded his kit with the force of a jackhammer. Songs like Pumped Up and Master Heartache were chaotic, fast, and loud, years before thrash or speed metal existed. But their ferocity may have also been their undoing. Critics dismissed them as too noisy, and without radio support, their albums didn't sell. Their follow-up record, Sir Lord Baltimore 2, shifted toward a more mainstream sound, but it failed to capture the same raw magic. By 1976, the band had disappeared, leaving behind only whispers of what could have been. Over time, however, Sir Lord Baltimore earned cult status. Rock historians now credit them as proto-metal pioneers, pointing to their influence on bands that came decades later. For collectors, Kingdom Come is a holy grail, the kind of record that proves heavy metal wasn't born in one place, but in multiple fires across the early 70s. They burned fast and bright, leaving a short but powerful mark. And while their story ended quickly, The next band on our list showed that sometimes one album is all it takes to create a legend. Number 6. Leaf Hound. Some bands take years to build a reputation. Leaf Hound did it with a single album. Their 1971 release, Growers of Mushroom, is now considered one of the rarest and most valuable hard rock records of the era. A mix of heavy riffs, blues grit, and psychedelic fire that has since been hailed as a proto-metal masterpiece. At the time, though, almost no one heard it. Leaf Hound were young, raw, and restless, fronted by the soulful roar of vocalist Peter French. Tracks like Freelance Fiend and Drowned My Life in Fear showcased a heavy sound that rivaled Zeppelin's swagger and Sabbath's menace, but with a wild, psychedelic edge that made them unique. Unfortunately, their label gave the record almost no push, and the band dissolved soon after its release. What's wild is how history came back around. Decades later, collectors rediscovered Growers of Mushroom, and original pressings began selling for thousands of dollars. Critics who once ignored Leaf Hound now call their record one of the definitive hidden gems of 70s hard rock. Even more impressively, Peter French went on to join bigger acts like Atomic Rooster and Cactus, proving that Leaf Hound's talent was never in doubt. The band itself may not have lasted, but their one record continues to inspire musicians and crate diggers around the world. Leaf Hound showed that sometimes one lightning bolt of an album is enough to carve out a place in history. And if they were psychedelic outlaws who vanished too soon, the next band on our list proved that supergroup lineups don't always guarantee success. Number 5. Captain Beyond. On paper, Captain Beyond looked unstoppable. Formed in 1971, the band featured former members of Deep Purple, Iron Butterfly, and Johnny Winter's group, a true rock supergroup. With that kind of pedigree, they seemed destined for arenas and platinum records. Instead, they became one of the most fascinating what-ifs in rock history. Their self-titled 1972 debut is still regarded as a cult classic. Unlike the straightforward blues rock dominating the charts, Captain Beyond blended progressive time signatures with hard rock power. Tracks like Dancing Madly Backwards and Armworth shifted tempos and moods mid-song, giving fans a wild, unpredictable ride. They weren't just making rock, they were experimenting with how far the genre could stretch. But their ambition also made them hard to market. Radio stations struggled to find a hit single, and without mainstream airplay, their label quickly lost patience. The band released 2 more albums, but lineup changes and lack of promotion stalled their momentum. By the mid-70s, Captain Beyond had faded into obscurity. In hindsight, though, their music aged better than many of their chart-topping peers. Modern progressive and stoner rock bands often cite Captain Beyond as a hidden influence, and their debut album remains a cult favorite for fans who crave rock that's equal parts heavy and heady. Captain Beyond proved that even with world-class talent, the music industry doesn't guarantee success. And if their story is one of ambition colliding with bad luck, the next band on our list shows how even future stars sometimes get lost in the shuffle before their big break. Number 4. Trapeze. Before Glenn Hughes became the voice of rock with Deep Purple, he fronted a little band from the West Midlands called Trapeze. And while they never reached the fame of Hughes's later projects, Trapeze carved out a unique sound that blended hard rock, funk, and soul years before it became fashionable. Their 1970 self-titled debut leaned psychedelic, but it was their follow-up, Medusa, 1970, that really showed what they could do. Songs like Black Cloud and the title track combined heavy riffs with grooves that hinted at funk and R&B influences, an unusual mix for the time. With Hughes's powerful vocals and Mel Galley's sharp guitar work, Trapeze sounded like a band destined to break new ground. Despite their talent, Trapeze struggled to find a wider audience. In the US, they built a loyal cult following, especially in Texas, where their energetic live shows turned them into underground heroes. But without major radio support or label backing, they couldn't compete with the giants of the era. Eventually, Glenn Hughes was recruited by Deep Purple, which effectively ended Trapeze's chance at mainstream success. The band carried on with new members, but the magic of the original lineup was never fully recaptured. Today, Trapeze is remembered as one of those bands that should have been massive, but instead became a hidden influence. For fans who dig deeper, their fusion of hard rock muscle with soulful flair feels decades ahead of its time. And while Trapeze slipped through the cracks, the next band on our list took things in an even darker direction, fusing heavy rock with an ominous, almost sinister edge that influenced generations of metal bands. Number 3, Lucifer's Friend. If their name didn't scare off the mainstream, their music definitely confused it. Formed in Germany in 1970, Lucifer's Friend was a multinational band fronted by British singer John Lawton. Their sound was heavy, experimental, and far darker than most rock of the era. A combination that would later earn them the label of proto-metal pioneers. Their self-titled debut wasted no time diving into ominous territory. Songs like Ride the Sky featured thunderous riffs, pounding drums, and Lawton's wailing vocals, all wrapped in a sinister atmosphere that felt years ahead of its time. Unlike Zeppelin or Purple, who mixed blues with hard rock, Lucifer's Friend leaned into a theatrical heaviness that almost bordered on doom metal. But being so far ahead came at a cost. Mainstream audiences weren't ready for their darkness, and critics didn't know where to place them. With constant lineup changes and little label support outside of Europe, the band never found the breakout success their sound deserved. Still, their influence trickled down. Future metal acts, from doom pioneers like Candlemass to power metal bands of the 80s, would point back to Lucifer's Friend as proof that heavy music didn't start and end with Sabbath. For die-hard collectors, their first 3 records remain cult classics. Lucifer's Friend may never have been embraced by the masses, but they helped set the stage for metal's darker, heavier side. And if they built the shadowy foundation, the next band on our list showed just how far that heaviness could go, turning sheer volume into their calling card. Number 2, Bang. When it comes to forgotten pioneers of heavy music, few deserve more recognition than Bang. Formed in Philadelphia in the early 70s, this power trio pushed the boundaries of heaviness at a time when most bands were still clinging to blues rock roots. Their sound was raw, thunderous, and ominous, earning them a reputation as one of the earliest doom metal bands, long before the genre had a name. Their 1971 self-titled debut is often compared to the darkest corners of Black Sabbath's catalog. Songs like The Queen and Last Will and Testament were heavy not just in volume, but in mood. Lyrically, they leaned into themes of death and despair, paired with riffs that felt crushing for their era. Listening to Bang today feels like hearing the roots of doom, stoner and sludge metal all rolled into one. But as with so many others on this list, fate didn't cut them any favors. Despite signing with Capitol Records, Bang suffered from poor management and a lack of proper promotion. Their follow-up albums never gained traction, and without mainstream support, the band quickly faded into obscurity. Over time, though, Bang's cult reputation exploded. Collectors, critics, and doom metal fans now look back at their debut as a landmark record, proof that heavy didn't just belong to Sabbath. Bands like Pentagram, Trouble, and later generations of doom acts would carry the torch that Bang helped ignite. Bang may not have gotten the fame they deserved in their prime, but their legacy lives on in every crushing riff that followed. And if Bang pioneered the darkness of doom, the final band on our list carried the raw energy of underground rock and turned it into pure thunder. Number 1, Dust.
Girls been cheating and you've been mistreating, but I'm doing the best I can.
Before punk exploded, before metal dominated, there was Dust, a Brooklyn band that sounded like a storm long before the rest of the world was ready. Formed in 1969, Dust released 2 albums in the early 70s that blended heavy riffs, wild energy, and a rawness that placed them years ahead of their peers. They weren't just another hard rock act. They were pioneers of what heavy music would soon become. Their self-titled debut in 1971 came roaring out of the gate with tracks like Stone Woman and Chasin' Ladies, which carried the same grit and power as Zeppelin or Sabbath, but with an added street-level urgency. Their follow-up, Heart Attack, 1972, was even more ferocious, boasting songs like Suicide and Pull Away, slashed so many times that showcased a band unwilling to compromise. What makes Dust even more legendary in hindsight is where their members ended up. Drummer Mark Bell would later reinvent himself as Marky Ramone of the Ramones, one of punk's most iconic figures. Bassist Kenny Aronson went on to play with Rick Derringer, Bob Dylan, and Billy Idol. In other words, Dust's DNA spread across multiple genres, even if their own names stayed buried in obscurity. So why didn't Dust break big? Timing, once again, played the villain. Hard rock was exploding, and without major label support or a radio hit, Dust was swallowed by the wave. By 1972, they were done. Their 2 albums left to slowly become collector's gold. Today, Dust is remembered as one of the great lost, heavy bands of the early 70s. They might not have filled arenas, but their music planted seeds that blossomed in both punk and metal. For those who dig into the hidden corners of rock history, Dust is the kind of discovery that makes you wonder just how many other giants were left behind. So what do all these bands have in common? They had the riffs, the power, and the vision to stand toe-to-toe with the giants of their time. But fate, timing, or sheer bad luck kept them from reaching the spotlight. Highway Robbery and Granicus burned bright but briefly. Budgie and Sir Lord Baltimore laid the foundation for heavy metal before the world was ready. Leaf Hound and Captain Beyond proved that one album can create a legacy. Trapeze, Lucifer's Friend, Bang, and Dust all pushed boundaries that would shape the music we know today. The truth is, rock history isn't just written by the winners. It's also shaped by the bands that didn't make it. The ones whose influence snuck in through the back door, whose sound inspired others long after their names were forgotten. Without them, the story of heavy rock would be missing entire chapters. That's why these bands matter. They remind us that greatness isn't always about fame, record sales, or headlines. Sometimes it's about creating something so powerful that, even decades later, people are still talking about it, still hunting down the records, still passing the torch to a new generation. So, the next time you're flipping through dusty vinyl bins or streaming late-night playlists, remember, hidden among the legends are bands like these, the ones who should have been just as big, but instead became cult heroes. Because in the end, being forgotten doesn't erase their impact. It just makes rediscovering them all the more thrilling.